Foreign and national dignitaries, former presidents, acclaimed musicians and actors, friends, neighbors, and family joined former First Lady Michelle Obama and President Barack Obama in a dedication ceremony at the Obama Presidential Center, which opens today, Juneteenth, on Chicago's South Side. The former president delivered a speech that emphasized American ideals and the promise of America's democratic experiment at the founding.
In forming our union, the founders fell terribly short of the Declaration's promise, leaving slavery intact, allowing states to restrict the franchise to white men who own property. But in drafting a Constitution and a Bill of Rights, they did have the foresight, the genius, to provide us with a framework that allows each generation to make our union more perfect.
Hello and welcome to USA Today's The Excerpt. I'm Dana Taylor. Here to talk about this historic opening is USA Today Washington Bureau Chief Susan Page. It's always good to speak with you, Susan. Happy Juneteenth.
Hey, Dana, great to be with you too.
You pondered in your piece on the opening of this center what would be on the president's mind as he dedicated his presidential center. When you listened to him speak yesterday, what stood out to you?
We heard a lot about hope and change. That was familiar from his presidential campaigns. He never said the word Donald Trump. No one did from the stage. But it was, I think, the subtext for his speech. He talked about some of the turmoil that's erupted since he left the White House 9 years ago. But he says our shared values, our belief in democracy, were going to prevail in the end. At least, that is what he is hoping for.
Former Presidents George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, Joe Biden, they were all present for the opening of the center. But this is the first time a sitting president wasn't invited. Can you speak about the significance of that?
Yeah, that is a break with precedent, but not a surprise. President Trump has, from his earliest days, promoted a debunked conspiracy theory about Barack Obama's birthplace. He continues to make all kinds of accusations against him and refers to him always as Barack Hussein Obama, which is an effort, I think, to suspect there's something suspicious about him. That is not something the Obamas have missed or forgiven. So not a surprise that they didn't include President Trump there. Kind of a message that the other former presidents, the other living former presidents all came, not only the Democrats, Joe Biden and Bill Clinton, but also the Republican, George W. Bush. They didn't speak, but their presence sent a kind of message, I thought.
Susan, the Presidential Center is now permanently rooted in Hyde Park on the south side of Chicago. President Obama considered other locations, but why did he ultimately choose to come home to the south side?
He had several finalists. One was the University of Hawaii. Hawaii, of course, where he was born, where he spent a lot of his childhood. Columbia University, where he got his undergraduate degree, also made the finalist. But at the end of the day, President Obama chose to go back to the place where he got his first political job out of college before he went to law school, the place where he met his wife, Michelle. He went back to the south side of Chicago.
Obama's presidential center is the most expensive ever built at an estimated $850 million. And it's also the first fully digital presidential library. Comparing this to other presidential libraries, what is and isn't included here?
It looks different than the others. It's really big. It's 5 stories tall. It looms over the park where it's located. And it's got a very distinctive, chunky kind of style. Some people have liked it and some people have not. It includes a museum where you have to buy a ticket. You can go and you can see Michelle Obama's dresses. You can see memorabilia from the Obama White House. You can see the President Obama's Nobel Peace Prize. But it doesn't include the archives, which other presidential libraries do include. President Obama decided to leave that to the National Archives and Records Administration at a separate facility in Maryland. So that's a big difference. And it also includes more aspects designed for the community than most presidential libraries. There's no presidential library with a research room for researchers, There is a branch library, a branch of the Chicago Public Library on the premises designed with a special focus on books for kids.
This is a cultural landmark that opens its doors to the public today on Juneteenth. What does that tell us about what this place is meant to be?
These libraries, they tell us a lot about the presidents whose careers and tenures they chronicle. This is a president's chance to tell his version of history, and that's true of all of them. And some of them, that version of history has been more candid than others. The original Watergate exhibit at the Nixon Library, which I visited with my kids when they were little, really whitewashed the Watergate scandal. Now that's been upgraded in a more historically accurate way. But some libraries are quite candid. The LBJ Library in Austin has a really searing account of the Vietnam War and what that cost and meant to President Johnson. So let's look at the Obama library. The fact that it is opening on Juneteenth is important because, of course, President Obama could have chosen to open it on any day. This places President Obama squarely in the long narrative of the nation's struggle for racial equality. And that's something he did not really choose to focus on to a great degree during his presidential campaigns and during his presidency. He aimed for broader themes there. But obviously, the first Black president, that's an important element when you look at President Obama's place in history. It's something that he embraces in a more forthright way than I think he did during his presidency. Opening on Juneteenth, which commemorates the end of slavery in the United States, that's part of it. And in the exhibits within, he also pays homage to others who went before in this struggle for race. He has a space that's dedicated to John Lewis, the former Georgia congressman and civil rights hero. And he acknowledges Harold Washington, the first Black mayor of Chicago. So there is, I think, a more of an emphasis on his place in the debate about race than he did during his days in the White House.
These presidential centers and libraries, they're self defined or defined by those closest or supportive of a president. So, how did former President Obama, who ran on hope and change, govern through a financial crisis and an ongoing war in Afghanistan, choose to tell his own story?
You know, Dana, it won't surprise you that he focuses more on the victories than the defeats. That is pretty much human nature, I guess. He does talk about the financial crisis. You know, remember he inherited that on Inauguration Day. The nation was at risk of entering another Great Depression. And the work that he did and that Nancy Pelosi did, that Congress did to try to steady the nation and with that the world's economic system in the wake of that financial meltdown, that was important. And he does talk about that. Also talks about the Affordable Care Act. You know, that is truly landmark legislation that he enacted during his presidency and very important. But you won't see much about his response to the Russian invasion of Crimea and the takeover of Crimea. There are some who think a more decisive response by President Obama there might have made Vladimir Putin think twice before invading Ukraine again. And also not much about his decision on Syria, where he first declared a red line if Syria used chemical weapons against civilians. Syria then did, and Obama backed off a military response. That was also seen by even some of his supporters as a mistake. But I suppose it is natural that he is more eager to talk about the things that left a mark in a positive way than to spend a lot of time on things where maybe there was another way to handle it.
Susan, as you know, Obama was just 47 years old when he was first sworn into office. He'll turn 65 this year, so he'll likely watch the center grow for many years to come. How do these spaces evolve over time?
You know, they do evolve over time. These presidential libraries, some of them are more successful than others at becoming centers for their communities, for their cities, and places that people still want to visit, even when a president is long out of office. That's certainly a goal that you see here at the Obama Center. There's a big focus on community. The President Obama's first job was as a community organizer on the South Side. And in a way, he's coming right back to his roots here. I mentioned the branch library of the Chicago Public Library. There's a big basketball court that's going to be used by the community. If you look at the grounds that surrounds the building, there are picnic tables and outdoor grills. It's really designed in the hope that it becomes both an economic engine for that community and also a gathering place, a hub for the South Side of Chicago.
There have been real concerns about the gentrification, possible displacement of residents of the South Side. Has the foundation responded to those concerns, and does the community feel ownership of this place, or might that take time?
It was a bigger fight than the Obamas expected. This facility is not only over budget, $350 million over budget, it's 5 years behind schedule. And part of that is because of community opposition that had to be dealt with, concern about takeover of this very prized land on Lake Michigan, concern about rising prices of housing in the neighborhood that would force out longtime residents. One of the things that the Obama Foundation has done is emphasize how many of the contracts for building this went to local contractors, and many of them diverse contractors as well. And the eating facilities at this Obama Center are not McDonald's. They're designed to be branches of places that you find on the South Side of Chicago. So they've made an effort to make it community friendly. But there are people in the community who are still not won over, and that's going to be one of the things to watch when this center opens and becomes a bigger part of the community that surrounds it.
And finally, in a 2018 open letter to the Chicago Defender, former First Lady Michelle Obama wrote about her mother and the teachers and neighbors who shaped her in a neighborhood on the South Side. She said, quote, "None of them could have known that a kid from South Shore would grow up to become First Lady of the United States, but they fought like it anyway." What does it mean for her legacy to be woven into this place?
We mentioned President Obama going back to his roots, but those really only date back to the point he had graduated from college. This is where Michelle Obama is from. Michelle Obama lived her whole life growing up 3 miles from the Obama Center. And, she remembers very much doing that. One of the things that Michelle Obama insisted on at the center was a hill for sledding, because, Chicago gets a lot of snow in the winter. So this is a homecoming for her as well. And part of the inspirational element of this center is to just think about that. She grew up in modest, middle-class circumstances, 3 miles from the center. And now she returns to open this museum and center that will feature, among other things, a collection of the fancy dresses she wore at the White House.
Susan Page is the Washington Bureau Chief for USA Today. Thank you so much for being on the excerpt, Susan.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. I'm Dana Taylor. I'll see you next time.